I got a job working the night shift at a highway gas station when I was 22. The money was decent, and as a college student, the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. schedule worked perfectly for me. The previous employee had quit suddenly without notice, which should have been my first red flag. But I needed the money, so I took the job without asking too many questions. The first 2 weeks passed quietly. Occasional truckers, random travelers, nothing unusual. The manager, an older guy named Tom, told me the job was simple. Keep the place clean, don't fall asleep, and lock up at 7 a.m. sharp. He mentioned one strange rule though. If anyone came in at exactly 3:47 a.m. and just stood there without buying anything, I should go to the back room and wait until they left. He wouldn't explain why, just said it was important. I thought it was bizarre, but Tom seemed dead serious about it. Then, on my 15th night, the pattern started. At exactly 3:47 a.m., an old blue Honda pulled up to the gas station. The car was beaten up, with rust along the doors and a cracked windshield. The driver never got out. The car just sat at the furthest pump for about 15 minutes, engine running, headlights on. I could see a silhouette behind the wheel, but the glare on the windows and the distance made it impossible to see a face. I watched from inside the store, expecting someone to eventually come in or start pumping gas. Neither happened. After exactly 15 minutes, the car slowly pulled away. I checked the pump readings. No gas had been dispensed. I reviewed the security footage the next morning during my break. The timestamp showed 3:47 a.m., and there was the Honda, clear as day. But something felt off about the footage. The car looked slightly transparent, almost like a double exposure in an old photograph. The next night, 3:47 a.m. came around again. Same blue Honda, same pump, same silhouette. This time, I decided to approach the car to ask if they needed help. Tom's weird rule popped into my head, but this was a car outside, not someone inside the store. Surely it didn't apply. As soon as I pushed open the store door, before I even stepped outside, the car jerked into reverse. But here's the thing. I didn't see brake lights. I didn't see reverse lights. The car just glided backward, smooth and silent despite the running engine, then disappeared down the highway at an impossible speed. I went back inside, rattled. I called Tom and told him about the car. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he asked me if I had gone outside. I said yes. He let out a long breath and told me that was a mistake, that I had acknowledged it and now it knew I could see it. Before I could ask what he meant, he said he'd explain tomorrow and hung up. That night dragged on forever. Every car that pulled in made me jump. But 3:47 a.m. came and went the following night, with no blue Honda. Tom came in the next evening, before my shift started. He looked tired, older somehow. He sat me down and told me the story. 6 years ago, a man named Richard Voss used to come to this gas station every night at 3:47 a.m. He worked a late shift at a factory and always stopped for coffee and cigarettes on his way home. He was friendly, always chatted with whoever was working, a regular fixture. One night, Richard pulled up at 3:47 a.m. as usual in his blue Honda, but he never came inside. The employee working that night, a college kid like me, watched him sit in the car for a few minutes. Then Richard slumped over the wheel. Heart attack. Dead before the ambulance arrived. Ever since then, Richard's car appears at 3:47 a.m., always at the same pump. Tom said the previous employees who acknowledged it, who went outside or knocked on the window, all reported the same thing. The visits didn't stop at the gas station. They started seeing the blue Honda other places, near their homes, outside their schools, parked on their street at 3:47 a.m. Tom looked me in the eye and told me I'd probably start seeing it too. He was right. 3 nights later, I was leaving my apartment to head to work. It was 10:30 p.m. The blue Honda was parked across the street, engine running, headlights on, same silhouette behind the wheel. I stood frozen on my doorstep. After about 5 minutes, it drove away. It showed up outside my girlfriend's house when I was visiting. It was parked outside the grocery store when I went shopping during the day. Always the same, always watching. Never closer than about 50 feet, but always there. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I woke up at home to my phone buzzing. A text from an unknown number. Just an address, the gas station. I checked the time, 3:47 a.m. I wasn't even at work. It was my night off. Then another text. I'm waiting. My hands shook as I typed back, asking who this was. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a response. You see me. I see you. Come to work. I didn't go. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but every sound made me jump. The next morning, I called Tom and told him I quit. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said he understood, that he'd been waiting for this call. He mentioned he'd probably have to start working the night shift himself again until he found someone new. Before hanging up, he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said the sightings would probably continue for a while, maybe a few months, but eventually, Richard would lose interest. Tom said almost everyone who worked that shift and acknowledged the car went through this. Most of them it faded after 6 months or so. Most of them. I asked what he meant by most. Tom paused, then told me about one guy, Jake, who worked the shift about 4 years ago. Jake saw the car and didn't just acknowledge it, he got angry. He went outside and started yelling at it, banging on the hood, calling it a piece of junk, telling whatever was inside to show itself or leave him alone. The car left. But Jake's obsession didn't. He started going to the gas station at 3:47 a.m. every night, even when he wasn't working, waiting for the Honda to appear. His girlfriend left him. He failed out of school. Tom eventually had to ban him from the property. The last anyone heard, Jake had driven his own car into a tree on the highway near the gas station at 3:47 a.m. The police report said he seemed to have swerved to avoid another vehicle, but there was no evidence of any other car. No skid marks from another vehicle, no witnesses. But Tom visited the crash site. In the police photos, if you looked carefully at the reflection in Jake's car window, you could make out the shape of another vehicle, a blue Honda. Tom warned me not to engage with it, not to get angry, not to obsess. Just ignore it, and eventually it would fade. Then he wished me luck and hung up. That was 3 years ago. Tom was right, mostly. The sightings became less frequent. Once a week, then once a month, then once every few months. But they never stopped completely. Just last week, I was driving home from dinner with friends. It was 11 p.m., not even close to 3:47 a.m. I stopped at a red light and happened to glance in my rearview mirror. The blue Honda was directly behind me, close enough that I could finally see through the windshield clearly for the first time. The driver's seat was empty, but someone was in the passenger seat, pressed against the window, staring directly at me through my rearview mirror. The face was pale, features blurred like an old photograph left in the sun too long. But the expression was clear. It was smiling. The light turned green. I drove through the intersection. When I checked my mirror again, the Honda was gone. I don't work at that gas station anymore. I don't even drive on that highway if I can help it. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I hear a car engine idling outside my window. I never look. I just close my eyes and wait for it to leave. Tom retired last year, and the gas station shut down 6 months ago. They're tearing it down next month to build a strip mall. I wonder if that will make a difference. I wonder if Richard will finally move on, or if he'll just find a new place to wait at 3:47 a.m. And I wonder about the next person who sees him and makes the mistake of looking too long. When I rented an apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown, the realtor mentioned that the apartment below mine had been vacant for several months. She said the rent was reduced because of it. Apparently, some people didn't like living above an empty unit. I thought that was ridiculous. If anything, it was a bonus. No noisy neighbors, no stomping around, no loud music, just peace and quiet. The building was built in the 1920s, all hardwood floors and high ceilings, with that old building charm people pay extra for now. My apartment was small, but perfect for me. A bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, was a tiny elderly woman who seemed sweet but distracted. She handed me the keys, took my deposit, and mentioned I should call her if I needed anything. She left before I could even ask about trash day. I moved in during October. The first month was perfect. The apartment was quiet. The building was quiet. I fell into a comfortable routine. Work during the day, dinner and TV at night, asleep by midnight. Everything changed in early November. The first time I heard the footsteps below, it was around 2:30 a.m. I woke up to the sound of someone walking across the floor directly beneath my bedroom. Slow, deliberate steps, heel to toe, like someone pacing. I lay there listening, assuming Mrs. Chen was showing the apartment to someone. But at 2:30 in the morning, that seemed unlikely. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I fell back asleep. It happened again 2 nights later. Same time, around 2:30 a.m. Same pattern of footsteps. This time I got up and pressed my ear to the floor. The steps were clear, rhythmic, moving from one end of the apartment below to the other, then back again, pacing. By the end of the week, it was happening every single night. Always between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Always the same pacing pattern. I was losing sleep, getting irritable at work. I decided to go downstairs and check. The next evening around 9 p.m, I went down to the 2nd floor and knocked on apartment 2B. No answer. I knocked harder. Nothing. I tried the doorknob, locked, obviously. I walked around to the side of the building where 2B's windows faced the alley. All dark. I cupped my hands against the glass and looked inside. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes. Nothing but bare hardwood floors and empty walls. In the moonlight streaming through the windows, I could see a thick layer of dust on the floor. No footprints, no marks. Nothing to indicate anyone had been inside in months. That should have reassured me, but it did the opposite. That night, I lay in bed, waiting. At 2:34 a.m. exactly, I checked my phone. The footsteps started. I got out of bed as quietly as possible and pressed my ear to the floor again. The steps were clear. Someone was definitely walking around down there. But I had just seen that apartment. It was empty. I grabbed my phone and started a voice recording, placing it on the floor. If I was going crazy, at least I'd have proof, or lack thereof. The footsteps continued for 20 minutes that night. Then they stopped abruptly, and I heard something new, a scraping sound, long, drawn out, like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor. It went on for hours. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I played back the recording. Everything was there. The footsteps, the scraping, all crystal clear. I wasn't imagining it. I called Mrs. Chen and asked if she'd been showing the apartment below mine. She sounded confused, said, no, she hadn't shown that unit to anyone in over 6 months. I pressed her, asking if anyone else had keys, maybe a maintenance person. She insisted no one had been in there. Then she asked why I was asking. I told her about the noises. There was a long pause. Then she said it was probably just the buildings settling, that old buildings make all kinds of sounds. She said it so quickly, so dismissively, that I knew she was lying. I asked her directly what happened in apartment 2B. Why had it been empty for so long? Another pause. Then she sighed and told me the previous tenant, a man named Harold Krantz, had lived there for 15 years. Quiet, paid rent on time, never any problems. He was in his early 60s, retired, kept to himself. Last March, a neighbor on the first floor complained about a smell. Mrs. Chen came to investigate and found Harold dead in the kitchen. The coroner estimated he'd been there for 3 weeks. She quickly added that the apartment had been professionally cleaned, that everything was taken care of, that there was no reason for concern. She said she was planning to renovate it soon and rent it out. Then she made an excuse about another call and hung up. That night, I barely slept, waiting for 2:34 a.m. It came right on schedule. Footsteps, scraping. But this time, there was something else. At around 3:15 a.m., I heard a heavy thud, like something large falling to the floor, or someone collapsing. Then silence. Complete silence for the rest of the night. I lay there thinking about Harold Krantz dying alone in that kitchen, lying on the floor for 3 weeks before anyone noticed. I wondered what time he died. I wondered if it was around 2:34 a.m. The next night, I set up my phone to record again, but this time I placed it in the middle of my bedroom floor, right above where I estimated Harold's kitchen would be. I needed proof of what I was hearing. I fell asleep sometime after midnight. When I woke up, it was 7 a.m. and my phone alarm was going off. I grabbed my phone and immediately checked the recording. The first hour was just silence and my own breathing. Then, at 2:34 a.m., the footsteps started, clear as day, pacing back and forth. At 2:58 a.m., the scraping began. It sounded like multiple pieces of furniture being dragged around, rearranged. This went on until 3:12 a.m., then the thud, then silence. But the recording didn't end there. At 3:18 a.m., there was a new sound, breathing, heavy, labored breathing, like someone struggling to catch their breath. And it wasn't coming from me in the bed. The phone was lying on the floor, and the breathing was right next to it. I felt my skin go cold as I listened. The breathing continued for over a minute, raspy and wet sounding. Then, barely audible, a voice. One word, whispered so quietly I had to replay it 5 times to be sure. Help. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking. The voice on the recording. It had been in my room, right next to where my phone was lying, a few feet from my bed. I had been asleep while something stood next to my bed, breathing, whispering. I called in sick to work and stayed at my friend Marcus's place that night. I told him I thought my apartment might have a carbon monoxide leak or something, that I was hearing things. I couldn't tell him the truth. He'd think I was losing it. But I couldn't just abandon my apartment. I had signed a year lease. I'd lose thousands of dollars. I decided I'd go back during the day, pack up some essentials, and figure out my options. I returned to my apartment the next afternoon, around 2 p.m. Broad daylight. Safe. I put my key in the lock and noticed the door was already slightly open. I knew I had locked it when I left. I was absolutely certain. I pushed the door open slowly. Everything looked normal from the doorway. I stepped inside and immediately felt that something was wrong. The air was different, colder. There was a smell, faint but distinct, musty, stale, like a room that had been closed up for a long time. Then I saw the living room. All of my furniture had been moved. My couch, which I kept against the wall facing the TV, was now in the center of the room, turned to face the kitchen. My coffee table was flipped upside down. The TV stand had been pushed into the corner. My desk chair was lying on its side. My dining table and chairs, I had 2 chairs, were stacked on top of each other in a precarious tower in the middle of the kitchen. I stood frozen in the doorway. This was exactly what I had been hearing at night. The scraping sounds. Someone had been moving furniture, but not in the apartment below. In my apartment, while I slept. I didn't go further inside. I backed out of the apartment, pulled the door shut, and ran down the stairs. I called Mrs. Chen from my car, told her someone had broken into my apartment and vandalized it. She said she'd come right over and that I should call the police. The police arrived first. 2 officers went up with me to check the apartment. We opened the door and they looked around, hands on their belts near their weapons. The apartment was completely normal. All the furniture was exactly where I had originally placed it. The couch against the wall, the coffee table in front of it, the TV stand in position, the dining table and chairs neatly arranged in the kitchen. Everything was perfect. The officers looked at me like I was wasting their time. I insisted that it had been moved, that I had seen it with my own eyes just 15 minutes ago. One of them asked if I was on any medications, if I'd been drinking. The other walked through each room, checking windows and locks. Nothing was damaged. No signs of forced entry. Mrs. Chen arrived while they were still there. She looked more annoyed than concerned. After the police left, she asked me what was really going on. I tried to explain everything. The footsteps, the recordings, the moved furniture. But I could see in her face that she didn't believe me. She told me firmly that if I wanted to break my lease, there would be financial penalties. Early termination fee, forfeiture of deposit, potentially legal action for the remaining rent. She made it clear she thought I was making excuses to get out of my contract. I didn't care anymore. I told her I was leaving and I'd deal with the consequences. She shook her head and left. I threw my essentials into a suitcase, clothes, laptop, toiletries. I didn't even pack properly, just grabbed what I could carry and got out. I stayed with Marcus for a week, then found a month-to-month rental across town. Mrs. Chen did take me to small claims court, and I did lose my deposit plus 2 months' rent. Almost $3,000 gone, but I didn't care. I was out. For about a month, I tried to forget about the whole thing. I focused on work, hung out with friends, tried to move on. Marcus asked me a few times what had really happened in that apartment, but I always changed the subject. Then one night, I was driving home from a late dinner. My new place was in a different neighborhood, a newer building, far away from Mrs. Chen and that old apartment. I stopped at a red light and happened to glance up at the buildings around me. I was on the street where my old apartment was. I hadn't realized I'd driven this route. The light was red, so I looked up at the 3rd floor of the building, at what used to be my apartment. The lights were on inside, not just the normal lights. Every single light in the apartment was blazing. Through the windows, I could see movement, shadows passing back and forth. The same pacing pattern I used to hear at night. But Mrs. Chen had told me she never found a new tenant. The last I heard, both my old apartment and the one below it was still vacant. The light turned green. A car behind me honked. I drove away and didn't look back. I did some research later that night. I found Harold Krantz's obituary online. He died on March 8th of the previous year. Cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. The obituary mentioned he was a widower, no children, and that he'd lived alone. Services were held at a funeral home I'd never heard of. Only 3 people signed the online condolence book. I also found something else. An old newspaper article from 1952. A young woman named Elizabeth Marsh had died in that building, in what was now apartment 3B. My apartment. She'd fallen down the stairs from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor landing. The article said it appeared she'd tripped in the middle of the night, perhaps going to check on a noise she'd heard. The noise had been coming from the apartment below hers, where a fire had started in the kitchen. The tenant below, the article said, had already died from smoke inhalation. Elizabeth was found at the bottom of the stairs, neck broken. She'd been trying to help. I don't know if any of this is connected. I don't know if Harold's ghost was pacing around his old apartment, or if something else was in that building. I don't know what moved my furniture or breathed next to my bed. What I do know is this. Last week, I saw a rental listing for that building online. Both apartments, 2B and 3B, were now available. The price had been reduced significantly. The listing mentioned vintage charm and original hardwood floors and quiet building. The photos showed both apartments completely empty and freshly painted, clean, pristine, ready for new tenants. In one of the photos of apartment 3B, my old bedroom, if you looked carefully at the window reflection, you could see the photographer who took the picture. But there was also another figure standing in the corner of the room behind them. The listing has been up for 3 weeks now. According to the site, there have been over 50 inquiries, but no one has rented it yet. This happened 3 years ago when I was driving home after a friend's wedding in a neighboring state. The wedding had been in Pennsylvania, and I lived in Maryland, about a 4-hour drive. I'd stayed later than planned, helping clean up and saying goodbyes, so I didn't hit the road until almost 10 p.m. The first 2 hours of the drive were fine. I took Route 15 south, a highway I'd driven dozens of times. Traffic was light. I had music playing, windows down, enjoying the cool night air. But around midnight, exhaustion started hitting me hard. I'd been up since 6 a.m., drank too much at the reception, and danced for hours. My eyes were getting heavy. I knew the signs. I'd heard too many horror stories about people falling asleep at the wheel. I decided to pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap. Better to arrive home an hour late than not at all. About 10 minutes later, I saw a sign for a rest area in 2 miles. I took the exit and pulled into the parking lot. It was one of those minimal rest stops, just a parking area, a couple of picnic tables, a bathroom building, and some vending machines. A single fluorescent light illuminated the bathroom entrance. Everything else was dark. There were no other cars in the lot. I pulled into a spot near the bathrooms, figuring if anyone else showed up, at least I'd be in a visible location. I reclined my seat, set my phone alarm for 20 minutes, and closed my eyes. Sleep came almost instantly. The knock on my window jolted me awake, heart hammering. For a disoriented second, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the figure standing outside my driver's side window, and instinctively jerked away, hitting my shoulder against the center console. It was a guy, maybe mid-20s, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie with a backpack slung over one shoulder. He had his hands up in a non-threatening gesture, mouthing sorry through the glass. He looked normal enough, scruffy beard, tired eyes, the kind of person you'd see at any college campus. I cracked the window about 2 inches. He apologized again for scaring me and explained that his phone had died. He'd been stranded here for over an hour. He asked if I could give him a ride to the next town, claimed it was only about 15 minutes down the road. He said his ex-girlfriend had dumped him here after a fight and drove off, leaving him with nothing. Every instinct told me to say no. It was the middle of the night. I was alone, and I didn't know this person. But he looked genuinely desperate, not threatening. And I was going that direction anyway. Plus, I was a guy, not a small woman. I felt like I could handle myself if things went wrong. Against my better judgment, I told him to get in. He thanked me profusely as he climbed into the passenger seat, saying I was a lifesaver, that he'd been worried he'd have to sleep out here. He set his backpack at his feet and buckled his seatbelt. I pulled out of the rest stop and merged back onto the highway. He introduced himself as Marcus. I gave him my name, David. For the first few miles, he talked a lot. He told me about the fight with his girlfriend, how they'd been dating for 2 years. But it was toxic, how she'd finally snapped during their drive back from visiting her parents. He said she pulled over at that rest stop, told him to get out, and left him there. I made appropriate sympathetic noises, but mostly focused on the road. I was still tired, and having someone in the car actually helped keep me alert. Then, about 10 minutes into the drive, he went quiet. I glanced over and saw he was staring straight ahead at the road, not moving, completely still. I asked if he was okay. He didn't respond for a few seconds. Then, without looking at me, he asked if I recognized him. The question caught me off guard. I looked at him more carefully, trying to place his face. Had we gone to school together? Worked at the same place? I was pretty sure I'd never seen him before. I told him no and asked if we'd met somewhere. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His expression was neutral, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. He told me he'd been in that car. I asked what car, my hand tightening slightly on the steering wheel. He said the one I'd crashed into 4 years ago, on Mountain Road. My entire body went cold. 4 years ago, when I was 24, I'd been in a serious car accident on Mountain Road, a winding 2-lane route that cut through the mountains between Maryland and Pennsylvania. I'd been driving too fast on a rainy night, lost control on a sharp turn, and crossed into the oncoming lane. I hit another car head-on. I walked away with a broken rib, whiplash, and cuts from the airbag. The driver of the other car, a man named Thomas Kieran, died on impact. His passenger, Thomas's younger brother, died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. I was charged with vehicular manslaughter. My lawyer argued it down to involuntary manslaughter. I got 8 months in county jail, suspended to probation, and 1,000 hours of community service. The Kieran family tried to sue me civilly, but my insurance settled. I served my probation, did my community service, and tried to move on with my life. But the guilt never left. I thought about Thomas Kieran almost every day. I'd quit drinking completely. I never drove above the speed limit. I'd become obsessively safe, as if being careful now could somehow balance out that one terrible mistake. And now this stranger in my car was telling me he'd been in that car. I stammered that it had been an accident, that I was so sorry, that I thought about it every day. He said he knew it was an accident, that he'd had 4 years to think about it. Then he told me his name was Ryan Kieran. Thomas had been his brother. He described the crash in perfect detail, details that had been in the police report but never made public. The way our cars had spun after impact, the sound of metal tearing, the smell of gasoline and burned rubber. He said he'd been in the passenger seat. His brother Thomas had been driving them home from a Phillies game. They'd been singing along to the radio. Then headlights came straight at them in their lane. Thomas tried to swerve, but there wasn't time. Ryan said he remembered the impact, remembered pain, remembered seeing Thomas slumped over the steering wheel. Then paramedics. Then the inside of an ambulance. Then nothing. He died at 28 years old. Thomas was 31. Thomas left behind a wife and 2 young daughters. I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the steering wheel. I wanted to pull over, to let him out, but we were on the highway doing 65 miles per hour. I asked what he wanted from me. My voice came out as barely a whisper. He looked forward at the road ahead and said there was a turn coming up, a sharp left turn. He asked if I remembered it. My blood turned to ice. I knew exactly what turn he was talking about. We were on Route 15, heading south. In about 5 miles, Route 15 connected with Mountain Road for a brief stretch before they split again. And on that stretch was the exact curve where the accident had happened 4 years ago. I'd avoided this route for years specifically because of that. But tonight, exhausted and not thinking clearly, I'd defaulted to the familiar path. He said quietly that he wanted me to feel what they'd felt, just for 1 second. The fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that something terrible was about to happen and there was nothing you could do to stop it. I started to say something, to plead, but he reached over and grabbed the steering wheel. I tried to push his hand away, but his grip was iron strong. The car started to veer. I shouted at him to let go, that he was going to kill us both. He didn't respond. His face was calm, almost peaceful. We were approaching the turn at 70 miles per hour. I yanked the wheel hard to the left, fighting against his grip. He was stronger than he looked. The car started to fishtail. I could see the curve ahead, the same curve from 4 years ago, coming up fast. In the distance, I could even see the tree that still had a scar on its bark where Thomas's car had spun off and hit it. I screamed again for him to let go. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched. The car went into a skid. And then, right at the moment we entered the curve, he released the wheel and sat back in his seat calmly. I jerked the wheel hard, overcorrected, felt the car tilt on 2 wheels. Somehow, by sheer luck or muscle memory, I managed to straighten out. The car fishtailed back and forth, but stayed on the road. I slammed the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. I sat there gasping for air, hands death-gripped on the steering wheel, whole body shaking. I could taste bile in my throat. After a moment, I turned to look at Ryan, ready to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask what the hell that was. The passenger seat was empty. No backpack, no indentation in the seat. The seatbelt was still buckled across the empty seat, but it looked undisturbed, like it had never been worn. I stared at the empty seat, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I unbuckled my own seatbelt and twisted around to check the back seat. Nothing. I checked the locks. Both doors were still locked from the inside. I'd locked them out of habit when we got on the highway. There was no way he could have gotten out. I threw open my door and stepped out onto the shoulder, looking up and down the empty highway. Not a single car in either direction. No figure walking away. Nothing. I got back in the car and just sat there, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe I'd fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I was still asleep right now. I looked down at my phone, lying in the cup holder where I'd left it. But it wasn't where I'd left it. It was on the passenger seat. I picked it up. The screen was on, showing a web browser. An article was pulled up. A news story from 4 years ago about the accident. The headline read, "Two brothers killed in head-on collision on Mountain Road." Below it were photos, Thomas Kieran and Ryan Kieran. Ryan's picture showed a young man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes, wearing a dark hoodie. It was him, the hitchhiker. Exactly him. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. It clattered onto the passenger seat. I sat there for, I don't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20, just staring at that photo. Eventually, I picked up the phone with shaking hands and searched for more information. I found Ryan's obituary. He died on September 14th, 4 years ago. Services were held at a funeral home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was survived by his parents and numerous cousins. The obituary mentioned he'd been a talented musician and had just started graduate school. It was the same person. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. I drove home that night, well under the speed limit, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see him in the back seat. The remaining hour and a half felt like the longest drive of my life. When I finally got home, I sat in my parked car in my driveway for another 30 minutes, too afraid to get out, too afraid to go inside. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I went in, locked every door and window, and lay in bed fully clothed with the lights on until the sun came up. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my family, not my friends, not my therapist. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. Maybe I had fallen asleep. Maybe it was a vivid stress dream brought on by exhaustion and guilt. But I couldn't explain the article on my phone. I hadn't searched for it. I couldn't explain the doors being locked from inside. I couldn't explain the empty seat. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about the accident. Not the original accident, but new variations where Ryan was there, where he grabbed the wheel, where we both went off the road. I'd wake up sweating, sometimes shouting. I started avoiding driving at night altogether. I took different routes everywhere, even if they added time. I never drove on Mountain Road again. But about 2 months later, I had to drive to a work conference in Harrisburg. It was a 3-hour drive, and I'd planned my route carefully to avoid Mountain Road and Route 15. I'd take Route 83 North instead, a completely different highway. The conference ran late. I didn't leave until after 9 p.m. I was tired but alert, caffeinated from the coffee at the conference. I got on Route 83 heading south. About an hour into the drive, I saw someone standing on the shoulder ahead, thumb out, hitchhiking. It was dark, but my headlights lit them up as I approached. Dark hoodie, backpack, scruffy beard, Ryan. I didn't slow down. I kept my foot on the gas and blew past him at 70 miles per hour. In my rearview mirror, I saw him drop his arm and turn to watch my car disappear. He didn't look angry or surprised, just patient. That was 2 years ago. I've seen him 3 more times since then. Always hitchhiking on a dark road. Always the same hoodie and backpack. Always in Pennsylvania. Always when I'm driving alone at night. Each time I drive past without slowing down. I don't look at him too long. I don't make eye contact. But I know he's waiting. I don't know what will happen if I ever stop again. if I ever make the mistake of picking him up a second time. Part of me thinks he's trying to get me to crash, to die the same way he did. Revenge for what I took from him. But another part of me thinks it's something else. The way he looked at me in the car, the way he said he just wanted me to feel what they felt. Maybe it's not revenge. Maybe he just wants me to understand, to really, truly understand what I did. I looked up the Kieran family recently. Thomas's wife remarried. His daughters are teenagers now. Ryan and Thomas's parents both passed away within a year of each other, about 2 years after the accident. The obituaries said they died of natural causes, but I read between the lines. Broken hearts. Grief. I'll carry this guilt for the rest of my life. I know that. I accepted that a long time ago. But I also know that eventually, maybe years from now, maybe decades, I'll be driving alone at night and I'll see Ryan again. And maybe that time, I'll be tired enough, or guilty enough, or just resigned enough that I'll stop. I'll pull over, I'll unlock the door, I'll let him in, and then we'll see what he really wants. Until then, I drive carefully. I stay alert. I avoid dark roads when I can, and I never, ever pick up hitchhikers.